Last we saw our intrepid hero, they had just delivered additional brain cells to the benevolent iterator Looks to the Moon. Having accomplished this great task, they now found themselves in want of a new objective. Fortunately, they had recalled that 5 pebbles had told them of some kind of ascension far to the west, having no other options other than to continue surviving, which, to be fair, was a pretty good objective. The decision to trek west was made. First, however, they had to make it to the farm arrays. Now, given that there is a gateway to the farm arrays in the early game region of the outskirts, one could be forgiven for thinking that this might be an easy trip. However, one must also recall that the numerous predators found all over the Rain World don't care about what one might think about a region, and will kill you just as much, regardless of where you are. After a slight navigational error, and with the rain closing in, the Slugcat found a new place to shelter and wait out the storm. They awoke early to find this shelter flooded, which is generally considered not to be a good thing. Seeking refuge from this new threat, the Slugcat compounded their earlier navigational error, arriving in an entirely different region, the drainage system. While the original purpose of this peculiar region is somewhat unclear, its form when the Slugcat arrived was a place of copper, concrete, and water. It contained relatively few enemies, in comparison to some of the more hostile climes of the Rain World at least, and contained relatively plentiful food. The main obstacle it presented was its long and deep flooded tunnels, which were difficult to traverse due to being, well, flooded. Now, in most cases, this region would be a footnote in the history of the Rain World. A secluded spot that once had purpose it no longer possessed. However, it contained a connection to a location of note, the filtration system. This, as it turned out, was the Slugcat's ultimate destination. While exploring this strange locale, the Slugcat even found the gate that led to the filtration system and entered it, but turned back as it was too difficult to see. At any rate, several cycles were spent here before the Slugcat decided that it would be better off attempting to gain access to the farm arrays. A short and largely uneventful trip later found the Slugcat entering the farm arrays from the outskirts. This region would prove a challenging obstacle. The most annoying of all its foes was certainly the wormgrass. While immobile, it would latch onto the Slugcat and drag them under if they stayed too long. This might not seem like a great obstacle at first glance, but the Slugcat was dragged under an unfortunate amount of times. It was a lot. Yep. Anyway, the presence of vultures, lizards of all colors, and scavengers was also not a great help. The Slugcat was not without allies here, however. It had the debatable help of the Raindeer, who, honestly, are quite majestic creatures when they work. They were a great tool to cross the deadly wormgrass with, as their long legs were unaffected. While it took several cycles, the Slugcat was eventually able to make it to a strange gate far to the west of the arrays. Certainly, on the face of it, this gate was odd. Directly on the other side lay only a sheer cliff, delving deep into the planet's surface. Above the gate lay a shelter, along with a structure erected by the local scavengers. It held a vantage point of what seemed to be some great structure in the style of the ancients. Given that there was no other route to take, the Slugcat resolved to go down the cliff. In doing so, the Slugcat encountered an echo of one of the ancients, who warned the Slugcat of what they were likely to encounter below. A network of tunnels and the dusty detritus of forgotten civilizations. While the Slugcat acknowledged the warning given, it was clear that there was still only one way to go, and that was down. The Slugcat threw themselves off the cliff face, trusting to luck that they would land safely, which, fortunately, they did. This was just the beginning of the Slugcat's troubles, however, for the subterranean was not only home to dusty railcars, mossy caves, and scavengers, but also a large and highly aggressive population of lizards, centipedes, and spiders. While it did take a few attempts, the Slugcats eventually found a most unusual shelter. The entire interior of a train car. Also, just gonna take a second to admire the backgrounds in this area of Subterranean. The way that the light plays over the background is so cool, and it's just it looks so old, which is really neat to see, you know? You can see what it was once, but it has so much charm that over the course of the whole game, the background design is really cool. Yes, right, that's where I was. Oh yes, this most unusual shelter. It turned out to be the case that the area around the shelter had a large population of the, mostly, harmless baby centipedes, which made for an excellent source of food for the slugcat. It also led to a unique opportunity. While the lizards were certainly fearsome foes, the slugcat reasoned that their primary motivation was food, not bloodlust. As such, the slugcat endeavored to make common cause with two of the local lizards, one blue and the other caramel. This would turn out to be a great waste of time. The slugcat's first attempt at making friends was with a blue lizard that happened to live in the same room. Feeding the lizard proved easy, as it only required getting into the proper position and running away until the lizard ate the food. The problems began with attempting to get the lizard into the shelter. For whatever reason, the lizard simply did not want to enter the railway car. Ultimately, this was fine. The lizard would just have to be fed more often. But it also meant that the friend passage would be unable to progress. However, the real difficulty occurred when the slugcat, having not seen their blue lizard friend for several cycles, threw a piece of food to a caramel lizard. These lizards are notoriously fickle, and prone to snapping even at the hand that feeds them. When the blue lizard returned from its hiatus, tragedy was sure to ensue. So, that poor bit of planning was quite unfortunate, to say the least. The caramel lizard proved to also be a fickle friend, only occasionally showing themselves to the slugcat, and often vanishing just when they would have been most welcome. As a result, the friendship of these two lizards proved minimally valuable at best. Besides which, the slugcat had realized that they had another problem. To explore the subterranean further, they would need a light. While trading with the local scavenger population was an option, the fact that the slugcat sometimes had a lizard accompanying them made the risk too great. Additionally, carrying a lantern around would also mean that the slugcat could only use one hand, and from what they had seen of the dark filtration system, doing that would be a very bad idea indeed. So, this left the slugcat with one option. Travel to 5 Pebbles once more, and do what they should have done so long ago. Eat a neuron to acquire its glowing effect. There were 2 ways to go about this. First, they could travel to 5 Pebbles properly, which would be a long and grueling trip fraught with many dangers. Alternatively, the slugcat could achieve one of several passages. Methods of instantaneous travel. This would allow them to skip 5 Pebbles' superstructure entirely, thus dodging many of its dangers. For this strategy to be worthwhile, the slugcat would need a second passage to return to the subterranean. There were 3 passages that seemed reasonable to the slugcat: the Friend, the Chieftain, and the Nomad. The Friend would require finding a cooperative lizard for 3 cycles in a row, and successfully sharing a shelter with it all 3 times. Given the difficulties the slugcat had been encountering in Subterranean, it seemed best to move elsewhere to attempt this passage. The Chieftain would require extensive trading with scavengers, which is a dangerous activity at the best of times, but would come with many useful benefits, such as being less likely to be killed by future scavengers. This would also require the slugcat to relocate elsewhere, as the scavengers located in the Subterranean were often hard-pressed by the local wildlife, and as such were skittish around strangers. Finally, the Nomad passage would require the slugcat to move quickly through the rain world, changing the region they resided in with each cycle. While this would be difficult, the slugcat had faith that proper routing might enable this as a possibility, especially once out of the dangerous Subterranean. So, the slugcat began a great sprint through the rain world, trading with scavengers where possible, running, fighting, eating, hiding, in short, surviving. First, the slugcat had to weave through the remainder of the Subterranean, then rapidly swim through the flooded waste of shoreline, barely dodging the local population of axolotls, lizards specializing in their ability to swim. Then it was a lightning-fast trip into the industrial complex, followed by a triumphant finale into the chimney canopy. Along the way, the Slugcat had also managed to acquire the Chieftain Passage, which brought them to the tube required. Now, at long last, the end of the long road to Ascension was in sight. After a short passage to Five Pebbles, eating a neuron, and another passage back to the subterranean, the Slugcat was ready to begin the final stretch. The challenge was not over quite yet, however. The final step was to move through the filtration system, inhabited by a frankly ridiculous amount of black lizards, highly sensitive creatures that tended to notice even the slightest noise. Despite a couple of close calls and a general lack of available food, the Slugcat managed to sneak past and into the depths. This was it. The danger was over, and all that was left was exploring this remnant of the past. As the Slugcat began its final journey, it noticed what seemed to be ghosts, perhaps of the past and perhaps of the future. The statues, eerie in their decrepit state, looked down grimly upon the little creature creeping its way through the remnants of a long-past civilization. The guardians, statue-like in their own stillness, simply watched on as the Slugcat continued on its way. Slowly at first, and then all at once, the still air became hazy and thick with what seemed to be gold. At the end of this strange, ancient path, the Slugcat found a pool of odd, black, oily liquid. With there being no other way to proceed, and no way to return from whence they came, the Slugcat leapt in. It swam down, down and down, descending ever deeper into this primordial soup until it found titanic beings swimming freely in the fluid. One of these creatures noticed the tiny Slugcat, and dragged it down into the depths, where the Slugcat, at long last, found some sort of ending. As it reached the end of its road, it saw the tree of its people, and what seemed to be its ancestors smiling down upon it. And yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe and like if you did, you know. This took a bit longer to make. As a result of a lot of IRL stuff that I've got going on. I do apologize about that. I plan on trying to aim for one video a week from here on out. We'll see. That's what I'm aiming for. I'll say that. I'm not entirely sure what video will be up next. It might be about Rain World. It might be about something else. We'll see. But I'm going to be attempting to complete the Gourmands campaign next, and that will be streamed here. I don't know exactly when, but I'm going to try and give like an hour's worth of heads up in the community tab when I can. At any rate, take care of yourselves. Have a good one.